When I left the army, I thought coming home would feel like relief. 12 years of serving as a military police officer in Iraq and Afghanistan had burned discipline into my bones. I had medals in a box, scars I didn't talk about, and a head full of rules I couldn't switch off. I figured my family in Texas would at least welcome me with a barbecue or maybe one of those awkward hugs people give when they don't know how to deal with uniforms. What I got was the emotional equivalent of a cold microwave dinner, lukewarm, bland, and nobody really wanted it. My dad shook my hand like I was a neighbor returning a borrowed wrench. My mom smiled politely, like she was greeting the pastor's wife after Sunday service. And my sister Clara? She didn't even bother to fake warmth. She looked me up and down, glanced at the duffel bag slung over my shoulder, and muttered, "You look like you've been living on the street." That was her welcome home speech. Not "I missed you." Not "glad you made it back alive." Nope. Just a jab that I looked homeless. Which, honestly, wasn't that far off. I didn't have a steady job lined up, no apartment yet, just a military pension and the hope that someone in this family would remember who I was. Instead, Clara reminded me right away, in this family, I was the side character, and she was the star. Clara had become the golden child while I was overseas. She was the CEO of Medicor Innovations, a medical tech company everyone in town bragged about like they owned shares. Every article about her called her visionary, or the pride of Texas. At family gatherings, I'd call in from deployment and hear them passing the phone around. "Oh, we're so proud of Clara. She's making waves." And then a quick, "Oh hey, stay safe," before they hung up on me because my minutes were expensive. Walking back into that house made it painfully clear that nothing had changed. My parents hovered around Clara, asking about her IPO plans like they understood the stock market. My cousins wanted LinkedIn recommendations. The family friends lined up to talk about her entrepreneurial spirit. Meanwhile, I sat there with a cup of coffee, invisible, nodding like a polite stranger who'd wandered into the wrong party. The worst part? I could smell the steak on the grill outside, but nobody asked if I wanted a plate. My mom slid one over to Clara before me and said, "You need to eat to keep your energy up, dear, you're carrying so much responsibility." Right. Because running board meetings was apparently harder than patrolling Baghdad. I tried to remind myself, "You're home, you're safe, don't lose your temper." Years in the army had trained me to keep a straight face while chaos unfolded. But family drama? That's a battlefield they don't cover in basic training. The moment that really stuck wasn't even Clara's jab. It was later, when I walked into the kitchen to grab water, and I heard her telling one of her friends, "Yeah, Elena's back. Poor thing, she never really figured life out, she's just drifting." That one hit. Because Clara didn't say it to my face, she said it like it was fact. Like I was a broken appliance shoved in the corner of the garage. That was the narrative she'd been building for years. Clara the accomplished CEO, Elena the failed veteran. I stood there, holding a glass, deciding whether to smash it or drink from it. Instead, I did what soldiers do best. I swallowed it down and kept my back straight. But inside, I knew. This wasn't just family drama, this was the setup for a fight Clara didn't even realize she'd started. And here's where I'll pause for just a second. If you've ever been the forgotten one in your family, if you've ever sat at a dinner table while everyone else celebrated someone else's success, you know exactly what I felt. Tell me in the comments if you've been through that, because I read every single story you share. And if you want more family revenge stories like this, don't forget to hit subscribe. Trust me, you don't want to miss where this is going. Now, back in that moment, I realized Clara wasn't just rude, she was setting the tone. She wanted me labeled as the loser, the veteran who couldn't adapt, the burden they'd all politely tolerate. She thought her words carried more weight than my years of service. Maybe in that house they did. Outside those walls? That was going to be a different story. So I unpacked my bag in the guest room, laid out my uniforms like I was still living out of a rucksack, and stared at the ceiling. This was supposed to feel like homecoming. Instead, it felt like I'd stepped into enemy territory without backup. And for the first time, I started to wonder, maybe the battlefield wasn't behind me. Maybe it was right here, under my parents' roof, where my sister's smile hid knives sharper than anything I'd carried in the desert. I pushed open the door to the dining room and the sound of laughter spilled out. Clara was in the center of it, sitting tall at the head of the table like she owned the place. My parents had practically built the night around her, making sure everyone knew the CEO had arrived. Plates of steak and bottles of wine were passed to her first, and the spotlight never drifted far from her face. I slipped into a chair at the far end. Nobody noticed. One of my uncles leaned across to Clara, bragging to a neighbor. "That's my niece, runs a company about to go public. A real pioneer." Clara smiled like a politician at a rally, practiced and polished. I'd seen generals with less stage presence. The questions came in a steady stream. "How's the IPO looking? What kind of contracts are you signing? Are you planning to expand?" It was like sitting through a shareholder meeting disguised as a birthday dinner. I sipped water and listened while Clara launched into speeches about medical innovations, growth strategies, and the millions on the horizon. The way everyone leaned in, you'd think she was curing cancer right there between bites of potato salad. I wasn't jealous. I'd faced down insurgents and convoy ambushes. I knew what real stress looked like. But the way she dismissed me without even a glance, it was like I was a piece of old furniture collecting dust in the corner. Then my dad, trying to be polite, finally turned his head in my direction. "So, Elena," he said, "what's next for you now that you're back?" The table quieted for half a second. All eyes shifted, and for the first time that evening, the spotlight landed on me. I cleared my throat. "I'm looking at a few options, maybe something in security or logistics. I've got the background for it." Before anyone could nod, Clara cut in. She set her glass down and smiled sweetly. "Logistics? That's cute. But you know, corporate America doesn't run like the army. You can't just bark orders and expect people to salute." A ripple of chuckles spread across the table. My dad frowned, my mom looked away. Clara basked in it. She wasn't just answering me, she was performing for her audience. I forced a smile. "Actually, Clara, coordinating convoys in a war zone isn't just about barking orders, it's about planning, timing, and keeping people alive. Not exactly the same as running a boardroom PowerPoint." The air thinned. For a moment, the laughter stopped. My cousin's fork froze midair. Then Clara tilted her head, her voice dripping sugar. "Well, you'll figure something out, I'm sure. Everyone has their lane." She let the word lane hang, as if I should stay in mine. One of the guests, a family friend, leaned closer to Clara and whispered, "She's really back for good? What's she going to do?" Clara, loud enough for half the table to hear, answered, "Probably just drifting until she finds a job. The military doesn't exactly prepare you for the real world." That hit harder than I expected. I clenched my jaw, staring at the steak I hadn't touched. The real world? I'd spent over a decade living in the most real world imaginable, where mistakes meant people didn't come home. But here, in this house, in front of these people, my service counted for nothing more than a punchline. I caught my dad's eyes. He shifted uncomfortably, cleared his throat, and quickly steered the conversation back to Clara's upcoming trip to New York. The message was clear, this wasn't the time to defend myself. Better to let the CEO keep her spotlight. So I sat there, silent, listening to story after story about Clara's brilliance. Investors she'd charmed, deals she'd closed, articles that praised her vision. Every tale was polished, rehearsed, and perfectly designed to keep the glow around her. Meanwhile, I faded back into the wallpaper. But fading doesn't mean forgetting. Each word carved a little deeper, each laugh added fuel. Clara thought she was untouchable, that I was no threat. To her, I was the forgotten veteran, the background character in her personal success story. Halfway through dessert, one of my younger cousins turned to me innocently and asked, "So do you even have a house, Aunt Elena, or are you staying here until you figure stuff out?" The table chuckled, and Clara didn't miss her chance. She leaned back, swirling her wine. "She's practically living out of that duffel bag. I told her it looks like she just came off the street." The laughter came again, softer but sharper this time. I forced myself not to flinch. If there's one thing the army taught me, it's how to keep your face still while the storm rages. But inside, I was already mapping the terrain. Clara had drawn the battle lines. She thought she had the high ground. What she didn't realize was that the more she paraded her success, the more brittle it looked, and all it would take was one slip, one moment caught in the wrong light for that perfect image to crack wide open. The night dragged on with Clara, holding court like the queen she believed she was. My parents beamed, the guests nodded, and I stayed silent, counting the seconds until I could step outside and breathe real air again. The first Monday morning back in civilian life hit me harder than any deployment. No uniform, no formation, no schedule laid out in 24-hour blocks. Just me, a cheap alarm clock, and a laptop that felt like a stranger. I sat at the kitchen table scrolling through job boards, trying to decode a new kind of battlefield, civilian job descriptions. Preferred, 10 years of corporate experience, must demonstrate leadership skills. I laughed out loud. 10 years of leadership? I had that in spades, except my resume said, platoon leader, instead of team manager. Apparently, leading soldiers through convoys in hostile zones didn't translate to managing office deadlines. I put in applications anyway. Security firms, logistics companies, even a few government contractor roles. Within days, the rejection emails rolled in like clockwork. We appreciate your interest. Unfortunately, we've selected candidates who more closely fit our needs. Translation: thanks, but we don't know what to do with a veteran. One interview finally came through. A logistics company downtown. I ironed my only civilian suit, the one I bought with deployment money years ago, and drove over rehearsing answers. The manager skimmed my resume, eyebrows raised. So, 12 years in the army? Military police? Yes, sir, I said, steady voice, hands folded to keep from clenching. He leaned back, pen tapping the desk. Look, impressive service. Really? But here, we're not moving tanks, we're moving products. The skill set doesn't exactly line up. I explained convoy planning, risk management, resource allocation, the kind of stuff you can't afford to screw up when lives are at stake. He nodded politely, but his smile said it all. Thanks for your service, but we'll pass. Driving home, the radio blared a news segment about Medicor Innovations, Clara's company. A Texas CEO prepares for a record-breaking IPO, the announcer said. My sister's voice followed, polished and confident, talking about innovation and disruption. I shut it off before I drove into a ditch. Nights weren't easier. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, replaying firefights, convoy stops, and names etched on memorial walls. The sound of mortars, the metallic smell of dust, it never really leaves you. And then I'd remember Clara at that dinner table, brushing off my years like they were wasted. That sting was somehow worse than the memories. The next morning, I went for a run, thinking maybe pounding pavement would clear my head. Around the 3rd mile, my lungs burned, but not in the satisfying way. Civilian streets were too quiet, no cadence, no unit pushing me forward, just me, alone, with nobody waiting at the finish line. Later that week, I met a recruiter at a job fair. He wore a too-bright suit, and a grin that didn't reach his eyes. We've got some positions, he said, handing me a flyer. Entry-level admin work, it's a start. Entry-level. After 12 years of responsibility that most people couldn't handle for 12 minutes. I forced a smile, thanked him, and walked out before I said something I couldn't take back. Back at my parents' house, Clara was there, breezing in like she owned the place. She hugged Mom, kissed Dad on the cheek, then turned to me. Still looking for work? She asked, tone syrupy sweet. Yeah, I said evenly. She grinned. Don't worry, you'll find something. Maybe security guard at the mall? They always need tough-looking folks. She patted my shoulder like I was a child. Mom laughed nervously, Dad coughed into his hand. Nobody stopped her. I walked outside before I snapped. The evening air was cooler, but my hands were still hot with anger. It wasn't the suggestion itself, it was the way she said it. Like I'd wasted my best years and the only thing left for me was standing next to a Cinnabon making sure teenagers didn't steal sneakers. For a second, I almost believed her. Almost. But deep down, I knew the truth. The world outside didn't see what I'd done, and my family didn't care. That didn't mean it wasn't real. That didn't erase the sacrifices. Later, a buddy from my unit called. He'd seen one of my social media posts about job hunting. "It's rough, huh?" he said. "They don't know what to do with us, but don't you dare let them make you feel worthless. You've done more than they ever will." And I thanked him, but when the call ended, the silence in my room pressed down harder than body armor. I looked at my duffel bag in the corner, uniforms neatly folded on top. Proof of a life no one here valued. Proof that to my sister, I was nothing but the family's shame. And yet, somewhere inside, that familiar grit stirred. The same one that carried me through sandstorms, endless patrols, and nights when fear sat like a weight on my chest. I didn't know what my next step would be, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to let Clara write my story. Not in this family, not in this town, not anywhere. So I sat back down at the kitchen table, laptop open, rejection emails flashing like little landmines across the screen. One more application, one more chance. The fight wasn't over, not even close. The invitation to my dad's 60th birthday party was written like a press release. Gold lettering, RSVP instructions, even a note about cocktail attire. Clara had organized the whole thing, of course. Dad wanted something simple, steak in the backyard with his brothers, but Clara turned it into a networking event disguised as a family gathering. I showed up in the same black dress I'd worn to a friend's wedding 3 years earlier. It was the only thing that passed for cocktail attire in my closet. Walking through the rented banquet hall, I felt like I'd stumbled into a corporate mixer. Men in suits, women in dresses that cost more than my car, champagne flutes clinking in every corner. The only thing missing was a PowerPoint presentation about quarterly profits. Mom spotted me and waved me over. "Elena, sweetie, can you help with the chairs near the buffet line? We're short a few." "No, hello, no. I'm glad you came. Just a quick assignment like I was event staff." I nodded and stacked chairs while Clara glided through the room, shaking hands with local business owners. At one point, I caught a glimpse of her on stage, rehearsing a toast with the microphone. She wasn't just throwing Dad a party, she was building her brand. Every camera in the room would capture her standing tall, perfect hair, perfect smile, the successful daughter honoring her father. I was background filler at best. When the guests finally settled, Dad sat at the center table. Clara hovered next to him, adjusting his tie, then whispering something that made him chuckle. I took a seat near the edge, sandwiched between a distant cousin and one of Clara's colleagues who clearly had no idea who I was. The conversation around me was a mix of stock tips and praise for Clara. One guy leaned across the table and said, "Your sister's brilliant. IPOs are tough, but she's got it locked down." He didn't even pause for me to answer before turning back to her with another question. Then came the moment that cut deeper than any sniper's bullet. One of my dad's friends raised his glass toward me. "So, Elena, you've been back a while now. What's next for you?" His tone was polite, but the silence that followed was anything but. I smiled thinly. "Still looking, it's a transition, you know?" Clara set her glass down with a little too much flair. "She means she hasn't found anything yet. Civilian jobs are tough when your main skill is yelling at people to do push-ups." Laughter rippled through the table. My dad didn't correct her. My mom shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Clara had framed the narrative, and the guests accepted it without question. I felt heat rising in my chest. "Actually," I said, keeping my voice steady, "it's about planning under pressure. Coordinating resources. Keeping people alive. Not exactly the same as spreadsheets, but useful, Arif." For a split second, silence. Then Clara tilted her head, the corners of her mouth curling into a smirk. "Sure, Elena, we all appreciate your service, but let's be honest, business is the real battlefield these days." That got her another round of chuckles. I took a slow breath, stabbing at the food I hadn't touched. Later, while I was carrying empty glasses to the side table because apparently, I was doubling as staff, a cousin leaned in and said, "Don't let it get to you. She doesn't mean it." Then he added, "But, you know, she's right, you should think about what you'll actually do. People can't live off old uniforms forever. It wasn't just Clara. It was the way everyone looked at me as if she'd spoken some unspoken truth they all agreed with. To them, I wasn't Elena Ramirez, veteran of 12 years. I was Elena, the unemployed sister, the one with no clear path, the one Clara could use as a foil to make herself shine brighter. As the evening went on, the speeches began. Clara took the stage with a microphone, thanking everyone for coming, listing Dad's accomplishments, sprinkling in little jokes. She was good. Too good. The audience clapped at every line. Then, as if she couldn't help herself, she gestured toward me. "And of course, we're so proud of Elena for her service," she said sweetly. "Even if she's still figuring out civilian life, we're patient, she'll get there eventually." Polite applause. Smiles around the room, my throat tightened. She'd managed to wrap an insult in a bow and make everyone cheer for it. I clenched my hands under the table, nails biting into my palms. That was Clara's gift, humiliation disguised as kindness. She got to be the hero while I played the punchline. Dad raised his glass next, thanking Clara for arranging the evening, praising her as the future of the family's legacy. My name didn't come up again. Not once. Sitting there, I realized something important. It wasn't just about being ignored or insulted, it was about power. Clara was building hers brick by brick, every word, every laugh, every photo snapped by the local paper, and every time I stayed silent, I handed her another brick. The party buzzed on around me, glasses clinking, voices rising. Clara laughed loudly at a joke from one of her investors, her hand resting on Dad's shoulder like she was already the head of the family. My mom's smile stayed fixed, brittle at the edges. Guests leaned toward Clara, soaking in her glow. And me? I sat back, letting the noise wash over me, thinking not about the steak, or the speeches, or even the humiliation. I thought about lines. The ones you draw, the ones you cross, and the ones you burn when you're done being pushed to the edges of your own story. The clink of silverware against plates faded as dessert was served. Clara was still glowing under the lights, entertaining her circle of admirers like it was her coronation. My dad leaned back in his chair, content, and my mom fussed with the napkins. I stayed quiet, sipping water, doing my best to ignore the burn in my chest from being used as Clara's convenient contrast all evening. Then one of the guests, bold from wine, decided to stir the pot. He leaned toward Clara with a grin. "So Clara, what's it like having such different lives between you and Elena? One of you leading a multi-million-dollar company, the other." He glanced at me and trailed off. "Transitioning." Clara laughed, the kind of laugh that wasn't really for humor but for dominance. "Oh, you know, every family has one." She went off to play soldier, and I went off to build something real. That was it. The chuckles, the nods, the smug faces, it flipped a switch. I set my fork down, stood up, and said, clear enough for everyone to hear, "Play soldier?" 12 years of my life, deployments, combat zones, funerals for people who didn't come back, and you think that was a game? The room went silent. My mom's eyes widened, my dad shifted uncomfortably, and Clara's smile faltered for just a second before she doubled down. "Oh, Elena, don't be so sensitive, we appreciate your service." Really? But let's be honest, who here would trade a successful company for what? A pension and a duffel bag? I felt my pulse in my ears. You think money makes you better? You think an IPO gives you more value than the people who protect your right to stand here and brag about yourself? Gasps scattered around the table, some guests looked away, pretending to be fascinated by their cheesecake. Others leaned in, desperate not to miss a word. Clara tilted her head, that CEO composure kicking in. "Look, Elena, your family. We love you. But you're not exactly an inspiration. You're an example of what happens when someone doesn't plan for the future." My chair scraped against the floor as I stood fully. "No, Clara, I'm an example of sacrifice. Of showing up when it mattered. You sit in a corner office and call yourself a visionary, but you couldn't last a week where I've been." That's when the phones came out. I noticed the faint glow of a camera lens across the table. Someone was recording, probably thinking they'd capture a juicy family fight to laugh about later, if only they knew what they were really catching. Clara laughed again, brittle this time. This is exactly what I mean. You get so defensive, so dramatic, you're embarrassing yourself. I leaned forward, voice steady but sharp. The only embarrassment here is a sister who mocks someone for serving their country. You think you're untouchable because of your title, but outside this room, people still understand respect, and you don't have it. The weight of the words hung there. For the first time all night, Clara didn't have a quick comeback. Her eyes flicked around, searching for support. Some guests shifted in their seats, uncomfortable, while others stared at me with something closer to admiration. My dad finally spoke, his voice low. Enough. This is a birthday, not a courtroom. Are really free. But the moment had already been carved in stone. Clara tried to smile, to wave it off, but the crack showed. She poured herself more wine, gripped tighter than she realized. The conversation sputtered back to life in cautious tones. I sat down slowly, my heart pounding but my face calm. Years of military training had taught me how to mask adrenaline. Inside, though, I knew this wasn't over. Clara thought she'd won the room. She had no idea that her words had been captured, that the smirk she wore while belittling me would soon have an audience far bigger than this banquet hall. One of Clara's colleagues leaned toward her and whispered, not as quiet as he thought, maybe that was a bit harsh. Clara brushed it off with a wave, trying to reclaim her ease. Please. People will forget by tomorrow. I almost laughed. If she only knew, people forget small slights, not viral sound bites. I pushed my plate away and sat back, letting the noise of the room wash over me. Clara slipped back into her polished persona, raising her glass, laughing too loudly, pretending the clash hadn't happened. But the shift in the air was undeniable. Some guests kept sneaking glances at me, like they'd just realized there was more to the quiet veteran than they'd assumed. My mom leaned over and whispered, "You didn't have to make a scene." I didn't respond. It wasn't a scene, it was truth. And whether they liked it or not, the truth had landed. By the time the cake came out, I'd calmed my breathing, the storm inside me settled into something sharper. Clara thought she'd cut me down in front of everyone. But what she'd really done was hand me the one thing she couldn't control, proof of who she was when she thought she had all the power, and proof of who I was when I refused to stay silent. The cameras stayed tucked in hands and purses, but I knew, I could feel it. Somewhere in the glow of those screens, Clara's perfect image had just been cracked wide open. By the next morning, the fallout had already begun. I didn't know it when I woke up, still stiff from sleeping in the old guest bed at my parents' house, but the world outside that house had already been introduced to the family drama. All it took was one upload. Someone at the party had posted the clip of Clara and me trading blows, not fists, but words sharp enough to cut steel. The video opened with Clara laughing about me being nothing but a pension and a duffel bag, then cut to my response about sacrifice and respect. It wasn't edited. It wasn't doctored. It was raw, real, and damning. By the time I scrolled through my phone with a cup of burnt coffee in hand, the views had already hit the millions. Comments poured in by the second. Unbelievable. Who insults a veteran like that? CEO or not, she's trash for talking about her sister that way. And 4. This country owes vets respect, not mockery. I rubbed my eyes. It didn't feel real. One night of humiliation at a birthday dinner had turned into a viral reckoning. My notifications buzzed non-stop. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years were tagging me, "Is this your sister?" Meanwhile, Clara had already started damage control. She released a carefully worded statement through Medicorp's PR team. The video circulating online is taken out of context. I deeply respect all who serve, including my sister. Family conversations are complicated, and I regret if my words were misunderstood. Misunderstood. That was her spin. The internet didn't buy it. Memes started appearing before lunch. Screenshots of her smirk with captions like, "Family shame, says the CEO, and disrespect doesn't IPO." Late-night comedians grabbed the story like sharks smelling blood. One joked, "Nothing says family drama like insulting your sister, the war hero, while cutting the birthday cake." the audience roared. I didn't laugh. Not yet. Because the texts started coming in too, some supportive, some not. My mom texted, Elena, why couldn't you just let Clara have her moment? This has gone too far. A buddy from my unit texted, hell yes, Ramirez. Finally, someone called out the arrogance. Proud of you. Two worlds colliding on one screen. Clara, though, was unraveling. Reporters camped outside Medicor headquarters, her investors wanted answers. Dad's phone rang off the hook with people asking if the clip was real. He grumbled, but never once said Clara was wrong. He just muttered about keeping the family's name out of the news. By mid-afternoon, the hashtag was everywhere, respect our veterans. People across the country shared their own stories of being dismissed after service. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every veteran who'd ever been told they didn't matter outside the uniform. I sat at the kitchen table scrolling, overwhelmed. It felt like standing in the eye of a storm, everything swirling around me while I stayed eerily still. Clara, on the other hand, went live on a morning news show, trying to plaster over the cracks. I love my sister dearly, she said, voice syrupy sweet. She's a hero in my eyes. What you saw was a private family moment that's been misinterpreted. Arlington. Except the video had her laughing, smiling, and dismissing me like garbage. No editing could scrub that look from her face. The public didn't buy her apology tour. Every time she opened her mouth, the comments doubled down. By evening, Medicor's official Twitter page had turned off replies. Their stock price dipped just from the PR nightmare. A local paper published an op-ed titled, If CEOs can't respect family, how can they respect customers? It spread like wildfire. Through it all, I stayed silent. I didn't post, didn't tweet, didn't go live, and strangely, that silence made me louder. People filled in the blanks with their own voices. She's probably too dignified to clap back. That's what real veterans do. Clara must have hated that. Her empire was built on being the loudest voice in the room. Now, silence was beating her. I poured another cup of coffee and glanced at my parents in the living room. Mom flipped nervously through a magazine without reading. Dad kept the TV on low, avoiding eye contact. They didn't say it, but I could feel it. They wished I had never spoken up. But I had. And now the whole country knew. I walked outside into the quiet Texas evening. The air smelled like cut grass and barbecue smoke drifting from a neighbor's yard. Ordinary sounds, ordinary smells. Except my phone buzzed in my pocket every few seconds with reminders that ordinary was over. The clip was still climbing. 6 million views. 10. By nightfall, it was on every major network. Anchors debated it with panels of experts. What does this say about respect for veterans in America? How will this affect Medicor's IPO? For the first time since I'd come home, my name meant something outside that house. Not just as Clara's sister. Not just as the family's forgotten soldier. But as a veteran who refused to swallow humiliation quietly. The stars came out one by one above the roofline. I looked up, hands shoved in my pockets, heart still pounding from everything that had unfolded. Somewhere inside, that grit the one forged in desert heat and sleepless nights settled into place. Clara thought she'd buried me in embarrassment. Instead, she'd just given me a platform bigger than I ever imagined. By sunrise, the clip had broken every corner of the internet. It wasn't just a viral family spat anymore, it had turned into a national talking point. News anchors, morning radio hosts, and even sports commentators were weighing in. A decorated veteran gets mocked by her own CEO sister at a family party, one anchor said, shaking his head. Folks, you can't make this up. The hashtags kept multiplying, respect our veterans. Shame on the CEO, family betrayal. People weren't just angry at Clara, they were piling on with their own stories. Vietnam vets, Iraq vets, Gulf War vets, even younger guys who just come back from deployment, all sharing the same sentiment, we've all been dismissed like this. Finally, someone caught it on camera. I scrolled through my feed in disbelief. A man in Ohio posted, I came back from Afghanistan and my boss told me my skills didn't apply here. Hearing the CEO say the same thing to her sister? Disgusting. Another wrote, "We salute you, Elena. You represent all of us who've been brushed aside." I hadn't asked for this. One dinner table fight had turned into a movement. And Clara? She was getting roasted alive. Cable news replayed the video on a loop, freezing on her smug smile as she dismissed me. Commentators didn't hold back. One veteran-turned-analyst said, "You can tell a lot about a person by how they treat their family. If she can laugh at her sister's sacrifice, what does that say about her leadership?" Meanwhile, Medicore Innovations was in free fall. Their social media pages filled with angry comments. "We'll never buy from a company run by someone who mocks veterans. If this is your CEO's attitude, count us out." By mid-morning, several hospitals quietly announced they were re-evaluating partnerships. Translation: they were cutting ties before the fire spread further. Clara tried doubling down. She sat for an interview with a local news station, attempting to cry on camera. "It breaks my heart," she said, dabbing a perfectly timed tear. "My words were twisted. My love for my sister is endless." But America had already seen the tape. No editing, no twisting. Just her words, clear as day, dripping with contempt. The comments under the interview said it all. Acting lessons, maybe? Fake tears won't save you. Back at the house, my parents were unraveling. Mom paced the kitchen, wringing her hands. "This isn't what we wanted, Elena. The family name." "The family name?" I cut her off. "She insulted me in front of everyone. She made me the family joke. Now the world finally sees her for who she is, and you're worried about the name?" Dad muttered into his coffee, "You could have let it slide. Not everything needs to be a fight." He wouldn't meet my eyes. That said more than words. It was clear, they didn't want a spotlight, even if the truth deserved one. Clara had been their pride and joy for so long, they couldn't see the wreckage she was causing. While they sulked, my phone lit up with something else entirely. Invitations. A veterans advocacy group wanted me to speak at an event. A national talk show reached out for a segment. Messages from fellow vets poured in, "You spoke for us. Thank you for standing up when so many stay quiet." I wasn't sure how to feel. I hadn't delivered some grand speech. I just told my sister the truth after years of swallowing it. Yet somehow, that one moment had cracked open something much bigger. The pressure on Clara grew by the hour. Medicore's board called an emergency meeting. Reporters camped on her lawn. Paparazzi caught her, leaving her office with sunglasses pulled low, looking like a cornered animal. And still, she refused to admit fault. That evening, I turned on the TV and caught a national broadcast. The headline at the bottom of the screen read, "CEO versus Veteran Sister America chooses a side." A panel of guests debated, but it wasn't really a debate. Everyone agreed, Clara was finished. One guest summed it up perfectly. "This isn't just a family drama, this is a story about values. In this country, you can be rich, you can be powerful, but if you disrespect a veteran, you've crossed a line." I sat there, remote in hand, absorbing it. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel like the forgotten sister, the extra chair at the table. My service, my sacrifice, finally, people cared. Clara, somewhere across town, was probably screaming into a pillow. And me? I didn't even have to lift a finger. America had taken the fight out of my hands and delivered the verdict. The screen faded to a commercial, and I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the TV filling the quiet room. The world outside was roaring, but in here, I just sat still, letting the weight of it all settle in. The storm didn't just hit Clara's reputation, it gutted her company. Medicore Innovations had been on the edge of its biggest moment, a shiny IPO everyone in town bragged about like they had stock in it. Overnight, that dream started collapsing. By Monday morning, the company's inbox was flooded with angry emails. Veterans, their families, even random citizens wrote the same message in different words. "We will not support a company led by someone who mocks those who served." Some emails were polite, others full of fury. A few attached photos of folded flags handed to grieving spouses, reminding Clara exactly whose sacrifice she had laughed at. Contracts started unraveling. One of the largest hospital networks in Texas quietly announced they were pulling back from a multi-million-dollar deal. When reporters asked why, the spokesperson said only, "Our organization values respect." Everyone knew what that meant. On social media, photos of Medicor products popped up with captions like, "Not in my house." Pharmacies and clinics began fielding calls from patients who didn't want anything with Clara's brand name on it. The board of directors panicked, scheduling an emergency meeting. Investors bailed before the stock even hit the market. The IPO, once hyped as a record breaker, was postponed indefinitely. I watched all of it unfold from the same kitchen table where I'd been drinking cheap coffee and staring at rejection emails just a week earlier. Clara's polished empire, the one that had cast such a long shadow over me, was crumbling in real time. Meanwhile, Clara tried to plaster over the cracks with PR statements. Medicor stands firmly behind our veterans. We value sacrifice. This was an unfortunate misunderstanding. But her face was the brand, and that face was now synonymous with arrogance. Inside the company, things got uglier. A whistleblower leaked an internal memo where Clara demanded the staff ignore the noise and stay focused on our IPO. That memo leaked to the press. Headlines the next morning screamed, "CEO doubles down while veterans demand respect." And I couldn't help but think back to that dinner table, her wine glass in hand, laughing at my expense. That smirk had bought her applause in the room, but it was costing her everything outside it. At home, my parents sat tight-lipped, watching the news reports with the volume low. Dad grumbled about media vultures. Mom muttered prayers under her breath. Neither of them said the obvious, their golden daughter had fallen, and she had done it to herself. Clara didn't stay quiet for long. She showed up on a primetime talk show, trying to shift the narrative. Dressed in somber black, she told the host, "I love my sister, I admire her service. But this clip doesn't represent who I am." The host, clearly unimpressed, raised an eyebrow. "Then who are you?" "Because millions of Americans saw exactly who you are when you said those words." The audience clapped. Clara smiled weakly, the kind of smile that cracks at the edges. By Wednesday, Medicor's employees started posting anonymous comments online. "She's impossible to work for. Toxic culture comes from the top. No respect for anyone." The public ate it up. What had started as family drama had turned into a corporate nightmare. Through all this, I hadn't said a word publicly. My silence only made the contrast sharper. Clara was everywhere on TV, in newspapers, trying desperately to control the fire. And I was nowhere, which made me look like the steady one. People began to call it dignified silence. Truth was, I just didn't know what to say. But America had already spoken for me. The real gut punch came at the end of the week when Medicor's board released a statement, "We are reviewing leadership decisions in light of recent events." Translation: Clara's own company was preparing to cut her loose. I sat at the kitchen counter, phone buzzing with updates, and realized the scale of it. For years, Clara had built herself into the perfect public figure, the one nobody in the family dared to criticize. And in less than a week, it had all unraveled because she couldn't resist mocking me in front of a crowd. It wasn't revenge I'd planned. But it was revenge all the same. At dinner that night, Dad finally said what had been sitting in the air for days. "This has gone too far." Mom nodded quickly. "Elena, can't you say something to calm it down?" I looked at them across the table. "Say what? That she was right? That veterans don't deserve respect?" I didn't make her say those words. Silence. Neither of them had an answer. I pushed my chair back and carried my plate to the sink, the clatter louder than it needed to be. Out the window, I could see the evening sky dimming, the first stars blinking to life. Somewhere across town, Clara was probably sitting in her high-rise condo, watching her empire slip through her fingers. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the forgotten sister. I felt like the truth had finally been louder than her money, her titles, and her smug little smile. The calls started stacking up faster than I could clear them. News outlets wanted interviews. Veteran organizations wanted me at rallies. Even high school teachers I hadn't spoken to in decades sent messages saying their classes were talking about me. For days, I ignored it. I wasn't trying to be anyone's spokesperson. I just wanted my sister to stop acting like my service was some kind of joke. But the silence didn't last. One morning, I opened my inbox and saw a message from a national morning show. The subject line read, "We want to hear your side." Normally, I'd hit delete. But after scrolling through dozens of strangers thanking me for standing up in that viral clip, I knew keeping quiet forever would feel like a betrayal to the people who saw themselves in my story. So, I agreed. The studio was colder than I expected. Bright lights, polished floors, cameras everywhere. A producer clipped a microphone to my jacket and told me to, "Just be yourself." Easier said than done when the entire country was about to watch you breathe. The host greeted me warmly. "Elena Ramirez, thank you for joining us. First of all, thank you for your service." I nodded, keeping my hands folded in my lap. "Thank you." They jumped straight in. "Millions of people saw the video of your sister, Clara, mocking you. They also saw your response. How did it feel in that moment?" I took a breath. It felt like the years I spent serving didn't matter. Not to her, not to my family. It felt like I was back to being invisible. The studio was silent. Even the cameras seemed to lean closer. "But here's the thing," I continued. "I didn't serve for applause, I didn't do it for headlines, I did it because it was my duty, because there were people counting on me." What hurt was realizing my own sister thought all of that was worthless. The host nodded. "Why do you think the public reacted so strongly?" "Because it wasn't just about me," I said. "It was about every veteran who's been told they don't belong anymore. Who's been brushed aside after giving everything." People saw that video and recognized their own experience. That's why it blew up. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I spoke the way I'd been trained: calm, steady, precise. And that made it land harder. The host leaned back, impressed, then asked if I wanted to say anything to Clara directly. I looked straight into the camera. "I don't want her apology. I want her to learn respect. For me, for every veteran, for anyone who's given more than they got back." That clip hit harder than I expected. By the time I left the studio, my phone was buzzing nonstop again. People were posting, "This is what dignity looks like. Elena doesn't need revenge, she already won." My words were being replayed everywhere, stitched into montages alongside flag ceremonies and parades. Back at my parents' house, Dad watched from his recliner, arms crossed. "You didn't need to air family business like that," he muttered. Mom whispered, "She looked strong." For once, she looked stronger than Clara. That was the closest thing to a compliment I'd heard in years. Meanwhile, Clara was unraveling faster by the day. Reporters caught her snapping at a cameraman outside Medicorps. Her PR team scrambled to put out fires, but every new headline made her look smaller. "Veteran speaks, CEO stumbles." Ramirez sisters divide public opinion. Except the divide wasn't even. 99% were on my side. That night, a veterans group invited me to a televised town hall. I thought about saying no again, but something inside me shifted. Maybe this wasn't just about me anymore. Maybe it was about making sure no one else had to sit at a dinner table and hear that their service meant nothing. So I said yes. Standing on that stage, facing rows of vets in faded ball caps and jackets covered in patches, I realized I wasn't alone. When I told them, "Family can turn their backs, but your brothers and sisters in uniform never will," the room erupted in applause. Some of the toughest men I'd ever seen had tears in their eyes. The cameras caught it all. By morning, that clip had gone just as viral as the first one. Headlines read, "Veteran turns insult into rallying cry." Clara's name was barely even mentioned anymore except as the villain in a story she never thought would escape the walls of that banquet hall. For the first time since stepping off the plane, I felt steady. Like I'd found solid ground again. Not because I had a job, not because I had everything figured out, but because I finally had my own voice, and this time, nobody could shut it down. The calls didn't stop, but I didn't dread them anymore. Each one was another reminder that Clara's cruel words had backfired. She'd tried to make me the family embarrassment. Instead, she'd made me the face of something bigger than either of us. Clara had always been polished. No matter the situation, she managed to look like she was in control. Board meetings, charity galas, even family dinners, her voice was steady, her smile rehearsed, her image spotless. But once the tide of public opinion turned, the cracks started to show. The first big slip came during a press conference outside Medicorp headquarters. Reporters shouted questions as she walked to her car. "Do you regret your comments about your sister? Are you stepping down as CEO?" She adjusted her sunglasses and snapped, "This is harassment. My sister has exaggerated everything. You people are twisting the story." The clip spread in minutes. Instead of calming investors, it made her look defensive, arrogant, and completely out of touch. Comments online shredded her. "She still doesn't get it. Blaming the press? Classic move of someone guilty. Are livin'." At the next board meeting, insiders leaked details to the media. Clara had stormed in late, slammed her laptop on the table, and accused the directors of being weak for not backing her harder. One director reportedly replied, "This isn't about weakness, it's about you." The story hit the papers before she even made it home. Meanwhile, her staff started leaking stories too. Anonymous posts popped up on workplace review sites. "She humiliates employees in meetings. She takes credit for everyone else's work. Her ego is bigger than her company." The narrative shifted from one bad family moment to a toxic pattern of behavior. She tried to spin it again, booking a live interview on a national talk show. Sitting across from the host, she attempted to frame herself as the victim. "I'm being targeted," she said, voice wavering. "My sister has always resented me. This is her way of getting revenge." The host raised an eyebrow. "Your sister hasn't said a single bad word about you publicly. She's refused to engage beyond her interviews about veterans' respect. Isn't it possible this situation is about your own words, not hers?" Clara's face tightened. She tried to recover, but the damage was done. Viewers saw it instantly. She wasn't apologizing, she was deflecting. The humiliation deepened when a retired colonel called into a live radio show while Clara was a guest. His voice was calm but cutting. "Ma'am, I buried men who wore the same uniform as your sister. You can make excuses all you want, but we all saw what you said. We don't need your spin, we need your respect." The line went dead. Clara sat frozen in the studio, and the clip went viral within the hour. By then, investors had had enough. Medicorp's stock tanked, and partners canceled deals left and right. Hospitals publicly announced they were reevaluating relationships with the company. Even her so-called allies in the local business community started distancing themselves. Photos of her at charity events disappeared from websites, invitations stopped arriving. Back at the house, my parents were glued to the TV. Mom whispered prayers under her breath, rocking back and forth. Dad muttered, "This is a damn circus." Neither of them blamed Clara out loud. They just sat there, wishing the whole thing would vanish. But it didn't. Reporters started digging into Clara's past, looking for any scrap of evidence that matched the arrogance in the viral video. Old employees came forward with stories. A college roommate admitted Clara had always been cutthroat to the point of cruelty. One article even compared her fall to other disgraced CEOs, pointing out that her problem wasn't just one bad moment, it was a pattern. The more Clara tried to fight, the worse it got. She lashed out at reporters, sued a blogger for defamation, and threatened legal action against anyone misrepresenting her character. None of it worked. The public saw her as a bully who couldn't take responsibility. What she didn't realize was that every move she made only highlighted the contrast between us. I stayed quiet, calm, focused on veterans' issues. She raged, blamed, and spiraled in front of cameras. And America drew its own conclusions. One sister stood for dignity, the other crumbled under the weight of her own ego. One evening, I walked past the living room and saw Clara on TV again. Her makeup was perfect, her smile forced. "This has been the hardest time of my life," she told the interviewer. "My company is suffering because of lies." I turned the volume down before Dad could hear me laugh. "Lies? The only lies were the ones she told herself. And in that moment, I realized the irony. Clara had spent her whole life trying to be untouchable. Now, she couldn't walk down the street without someone whispering about her fall. Her empire wasn't collapsing because of me. It was collapsing because of her. And no matter how much she fought it, America had already delivered its verdict. The family group chat lit up like a bonfire. Cousins, aunts, uncles, everyone suddenly had an opinion about the sisters. Some messages were short, saw the clip, unreal. Others were long essays about loyalty, family, and whether airing dirty laundry had gone too far. The irony? I hadn't aired anything. Clara had. All I'd done was answer her. At the house, tension buzzed through the air. My mom paced, wringing her hands, whispering about bad energy. My dad sat stone, faced in his recliner, pretending to read the paper while the TV behind him replayed coverage of Clara's meltdown. Dinner that night was worse than any deployment chow line. Mom set a casserole on the table and whispered, "We have to stop this, Elena. Families don't survive this kind of thing." I put down my fork. "Mom, families survive a lot worse. What they don't survive is pretending everything's fine while one person stomps all over the rest." Dad grunted without looking up. "You could have walked away that night. Instead, you turned it into a spectacle." I laughed bitterly. A spectacle? I didn't film it. I didn't upload it. Clara did that to herself. Then, the silence after was thick. No one wanted to say it out loud, but the truth sat heavy between us. Clara had been the pride of the family, and now she was the shame. Relatives started choosing sides. Aunt Maria called me to say she was proud. "You spoke the truth we've all swallowed for years. Clara always thought she was above us." But Uncle Joe wasn't so kind. "She's still your sister, you're letting strangers on the internet destroy her." That. Destroy her? Clara had been handed every advantage, every ounce of praise. She destroyed herself with arrogance, and I wasn't about to carry that blame. At church the following Sunday, whispers followed me down the aisle. Some people squeezed my hand, thanking me for my service. Others averted their eyes, too afraid of being pulled into the feud. Mom cried quietly beside me, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, embarrassed not by Clara's words but by the fallout. The real fracture came when Dad's brother invited us all to a barbecue. Half the family showed up, but the air was electric with unspoken accusations. One cousin muttered, "This is tearing us apart." Another shot back, "It's not Elena's fault. We all saw the video." Someone else chimed in, "Blood is blood. You don't shame family like this." I finally snapped. She called me a homeless veteran in front of everyone. That's the shame. Not me standing up for myself. The yard went silent. Even the kids kicking a soccer ball froze. Clara wasn't there, of course. She was too busy firefighting at Medicorps. But her shadow loomed over every word. Relatives argued in corners, lines drawn in the sand. Some clung to the old narrative, Clara, the golden child, me the bitter soldier. Others finally admitted what they'd always known. Clara had been cruel for years, and nobody wanted to say it until the whole world forced them to. After the barbecue, Mom cornered me in the kitchen. Her voice was low, desperate. "Elena, can't you just fix it? Say something to defend her? She's still your sister." I stared at her, stunned. Defend her? After she humiliated me in front of the whole family? After she turned me into a punchline? You want me to throw myself under the bus so she can keep her throne? Tears filled her eyes. "It's not about a throne, it's about keeping this family together." I shook my head. "No, Mom. It's about keeping her comfortable. And I'm done being the cushion." Dad walked in just as I left, muttering, "Stubborn, just like always." But I wasn't stubborn. I was finished. Finished carrying the weight of Clara's arrogance and my parents' blind loyalty. That night, alone in the guest room, I scrolled through messages from strangers again. A Marine wrote, "My brother hasn't spoken to me in years because he thinks I wasted my life in uniform. Seeing you stand up, it gave me hope." A Gold Star widow wrote, Thank you for reminding people what respect really means. Those messages were family, too, the kind you choose, the kind forged in something stronger than blood. I put the phone down and stared at the ceiling. For years, Clara's voice had drowned out mine in this family. Now, the world was hearing me louder than her. And the irony was brutal. She'd spent a lifetime trying to be the hero, and it was her cruelty that finally revealed who she really was. Down the hall, I heard my parents whispering, their voices sharp, low, panicked. Maybe they were worried about Clara, maybe about themselves, maybe about the family name. Whatever it was, I knew one thing: the split wasn't going away. Not this week, not this year, maybe not ever. And strangely, for the first time, I didn't care. The announcement hit the news like a thunderclap. Medicor CEO steps down amid controversy. Clara's face, once plastered across glossy magazines as the face of innovation, now flashed on every screen under the word disgraced. The board's decision wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even surprising. They had reached the point of no return. Investors were gone, deals evaporated, employees leaking horror stories to anyone who would listen. Keeping Clara in charge was like bailing water on a sinking ship with a thimble, so they cut her loose. When the headline broke, I was sitting at the kitchen table, same place I'd been when the first viral clip exploded. My phone buzzed with texts. "She's out. Did you see? Your sister just lost everything." I set the phone down and stared at the wall. For years, Clara had been untouchable. Now she was just another fallen CEO with a scandal attached to her name. Her press conference later that day was a disaster. She walked up to the podium in a tailored black suit, trying to look composed. Cameras clicked, reporters shouted, and she opened her mouth to speak. "This has been the most painful time of my life," she began. "I am stepping down to protect my company, which I love deeply. The media has twisted a private family moment into something ugly. But I will rise again." It sounded less like an apology and more like a campaign speech. Reporters pressed her. "Do you regret mocking your sister? Do you regret your words about veterans?" Clara dodged every one of them, repeating, "This is about a misunderstanding." By the time she left the stage, social media had already torn her apart. Still no accountability. "She's learned nothing. Good riddance." At home, my parents sat stiffly watching the broadcast. Mom whispered, "My poor baby." Dad muttered, "Sharks always circle when they smell blood." Neither of them mentioned me. Neither of them said Clara had brought this on herself. It was always someone else's fault, always someone else's cruelty. That night, the paparazzi camped outside her condo. She tried to sneak out in sweats and sunglasses, but cameras caught her anyway. Photos plastered across tabloids showed her looking small, tired, beaten. For the first time in her adult life, Clara Ramirez didn't look like a star. She looked like just another person who thought she was above consequences and got dragged down by them. What followed was worse for her than any headline. She became a punchline. Late-night shows turned her fall into comedy sketches. Memes compared her to every other CEO who'd thought they were invincible. People photoshopped her into military ads with the caption, "Disrespect, not the leadership America wants." Meanwhile, Medicor moved on. Within a week, the board appointed an interim CEO and announced new initiatives to rebuild trust. They issued a polished statement. "We deeply value veterans and regret recent events." Clara's name wasn't even mentioned. Her company had erased her in record time. Relatives who once bragged about her fell silent. Aunt Maria, who had called me earlier, told me at Sunday lunch, "We don't even bring her up anymore, it's too embarrassing." Uncle Joe, the one who accused me of destroying her, avoided my eyes. Everyone had seen the wreckage, and nobody wanted to admit they'd hitched their wagon to Clara's star for years. Then came the final humiliation. A national paper ran a profile titled, "The Rise and Fall of Clara Ramirez." It traced her from childhood to CEO, painting her as ruthless, egotistical, and incapable of empathy. The article ended with one brutal line: "Her sister's silence spoke louder than Clara's empire." When I read it, I didn't feel joy. Not exactly. It wasn't victory champagne, it was the quiet sense that the truth had finally caught up. She had built herself on image, and when the mask slipped, there was nothing underneath. The knock at the door came late that night. Clara stood there, mascara smudged, hair pulled back in a messy knot, eyes swollen from crying. She didn't look like the CEO anymore. She looked like the sister I'd grown up with, stripped of armor, stripped of everything. "Elena," she whispered, voice cracking. "Please. You have to help me. Just one statement. Say I didn't mean it, say the media twisted it, please." I stared at her, memories flooding in. The smirk at the dinner table. The cruel words. Years of dismissal. And now her begging for me to clean up the mess she'd made. My parents hovered behind me, desperate, hopeful. Mom's eyes pleaded. Dad cleared his throat like he might say something, then stayed silent. Clara reached for my hand. "You don't understand, they've taken everything. My company, my reputation, my friends, I have nothing left. Please, Elena. You can save me." For the first time, I saw it clearly. All her power, all her money, all her fame, it was gone. And without it, she had nothing. Nothing except the sister she'd spent years humiliating. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch, let her feel the weight of it. Because the truth was, her downfall wasn't my doing. It was hers. And there she was, finally facing it. Clara's fingers clutched my wrist like a drowning swimmer grabbing a life preserver. Her voice cracked, raw, unpolished for the first time in years. "Please, Elena. Just one statement, say I didn't mean it, tell them I respect you, if it comes from you, they'll believe it." Behind her, Mom's hands trembled as she whispered, "She's still your sister." Dad's jaw tightened, eyes fixed on me like I was holding the detonator to a bomb. I pulled my hand free. "You don't need me to save you, Clara, you need to take responsibility for what you said. And you can't do it, can you?" Her face crumpled. "They've ruined me. I can't walk outside without cameras in my face. I can't go online without seeing my name dragged through the mud. I've lost my company. My friends don't even return my calls. You don't understand what that's like." I laughed once, bitter. "No, Clara. I do understand. I came home from war zones to a family that treated me like I was invisible. I know exactly what it's like to feel like you don't exist. The only difference is, I didn't bring that on myself. You did." She shook her head violently. "It was a joke. Just a joke at a party. You could have laughed it off. You didn't have to make it into this circus." The words hit like a slap. I leaned forward. "You think I made this happen? You think I edited that video? Uploaded it? Made you sneer into a camera about your sister being a homeless veteran? That was all you, Clara. Every second of it." Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the couch. For the first time, she didn't look like a CEO or a golden child, she just looked empty. Mom rushed to her side, stroking her hair like Clara was still a teenager who'd flunked a test. "Elena, have some compassion, she's lost everything." I stared at both of them, heat rising in my chest. When I lost everything, my home, my peace, my sense of belonging, did anyone comfort me? Did anyone care when I was sleeping in transit barracks overseas while Clara was being toasted at galas? No. You clapped for her and pitied me. Don't talk to me about compassion now. Dad finally spoke, voice hard. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? Watching her fall. Watching your sister suffer." I met his eyes without blinking. "No. I'm watching her finally face the consequences the rest of us live with every day. She built her empire on image and arrogance, and she thought she was untouchable. Turns out, she wasn't. That's not my doing, it's hers." Clara's sobs filled the room. She tried once more, voice hoarse. "Elena, please. I'll make it right. I'll tell them I donated to veteran causes, I'll..." "Stop." My voice cut sharper than I intended. "You don't get it. This isn't about spinning a story, it's about truth. And the truth is, you disrespected me, and by extension, every veteran in this country. America didn't choose my side because I'm perfect. They chose it because they saw what you really are. The silence afterward was suffocating. Mom's tears dripped onto Clara's shoulder. Dad's hands gripped the arms of his chair until his knuckles turned white. Clara just stared at the carpet, shoulders shaking, her confidence stripped bare. I stood, my decision clear in every muscle of my body. I won't lie for you. I won't rescue you. Not after years of being treated like I was nothing. This isn't revenge, Clara, this is justice catching up. You asked the world to admire you, and they did until they saw the real you. Her head jerked up, eyes red, face blotchy. So that's it? You'll just walk away while they destroy me? I leaned down, close enough for her to hear every word. No, Clara, you destroyed yourself, and now you get to live with it. I turned toward the door. Mom called after me, Elena, don't do this. Dad muttered something about family being all we have. But I didn't stop. Out on the porch, the night air was cool against my face. I breathed deeply, letting the tension roll off me. For the first time since I'd stepped off the plane, I wasn't carrying Clara's shadow on my shoulders. She had tried to bury me under it, but all she'd done was dig her own grave. Inside, muffled sobs and hushed arguments echoed through the walls. That was their mess now, not mine. I walked down the steps, my boots crunching against the gravel, feeling lighter than I had in years. And for once, I didn't look back. The weeks that followed felt strangely quiet. The cameras faded from Clara's street, the headlines moved on to fresher scandals, and Medicor announced their shiny new CEO with a photo op that erased Clara from the company's history. For the first time in a long time, I woke up without the weight of her shadow pressing down on me. Instead, my mornings filled with something else. Invitations. Veterans groups, universities, even local city councils wanted me to speak. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't a motivational speaker. I was a soldier who did her job and came home. But everywhere I went, people said the same thing. You reminded us that sacrifice deserves respect. So I leaned into it. At one event in Dallas, I stood in front of a crowd of high school kids, some in JROTC uniforms, others just curious. I told them the truth, not the polished kind, not the sugar-coated kind. I talked about long nights in the desert, about missing holidays, about the weight of watching friends not make it home. And then I told them about family, the kind that fails you, and the kind you find in your brothers and sisters in uniform. When I finished, the room stood. Not for me, but for what I represented. And in that moment, I didn't feel like the forgotten sister anymore, I felt seen. The shift wasn't just public, it was personal. For years, I had carried the sting of being dismissed, of hearing Clara's voice overshadow mine in every room. Now, people were hearing me without her filter. And more importantly, they were hearing every veteran who had ever been brushed aside. Back in my small town, neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years stopped me in the grocery store. Thank you for what you did for your service, and for standing up. Even the same cousin who once snickered about me living out of a duffel bag came up, red-faced, and mumbled, "Guess I was wrong about you." I didn't rub it in, I just nodded. Sometimes, silence is the sharpest response. Clara, meanwhile, disappeared from public view. Rumors floated she'd sold her condo, she was hiding in another city, she was working on herself. But for the first time in decades, her life wasn't my problem. I didn't need to chase her approval, and I didn't need to carry her shame. She was on her own, stripped of the empire she had used to keep the rest of us in her shadow. One Saturday morning, I dug out an old wooden box from my duffel. Inside were medals, folded flags, and photographs that smelled like sand and sweat. I carried it into the backyard, where the ground was soft from last night's rain, and planted a small American flag in the dirt. My hands were steady as I pressed the pole into the earth. It wasn't for ceremony, it wasn't for anyone else to see, it was for me to mark the line where the old wait ended and the new chapter began. Later, as the sun set, I sat on the porch with a glass of water, watching the flag ripple gently in the breeze. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to prove myself. I didn't feel like a soldier without a mission or a sister without a place. I felt whole. Neighbors waved as they passed. A little boy on a bike stopped, pointed at the flag, and said, "Are you the veteran from TV?" I smiled. "Yeah, kid, that's me." He grinned, then pedaled off, shouting, "Cool." It was small, but it meant more than Clara's boardroom applause ever had. Respect from strangers felt different. It was honest, uncoached, unforced. That night, lying in bed, I realized the truth I had been circling for months. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need Clara to crumble. That had just been the consequence of her choices. What I needed was freedom from her shadow, from my family's silence, from the lie that I was the shame. And I had it now. The next week, I accepted an invitation to join a nonprofit supporting veterans transitioning to civilian life. Not as a face on a poster, but as someone who had lived it. I sat in rooms with men and women just like me, trading stories, offering advice, and laughing at the absurdities only we could understand. It felt like home again, not the one I'd lost, but the one I built myself. One evening, after a long day, I stood by the flag in the yard. The sky was streaked with orange and purple, the kind of Texas sunset you can't buy with any IPO money. I touched the fabric, crisp and clean, and said quietly, "I'm not the family's shame anymore, I'm their reminder of what pride should look like." And with that, I turned back toward the house, ready for whatever came next. In the end, this wasn't just about me and Clara. It was bigger than one family fight, bigger than one company's collapse. It was proof that respect matters, that sacrifice deserves recognition, and that sometimes the loudest revenge isn't shouting, it's simply standing tall and letting the truth speak for itself. These family revenge stories remind us that behind every family drama, there's a choice, to stay silent or to stand up. I chose to stand, and I'll never regret it. If stories like this resonate with you, if you want more powerful revenge stories and raw family drama, make sure to hit that subscribe button and share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one.